Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age from the authors of The Curious Advantage. In this episode, Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones, authors of the book The Curious Advantage, introduce the power skill of curiosity, looking at the impact of curiosity as a driver of value for the global firm Novartis, while introducing their model, Sailing the 7C's of Curiosity. The guest host for this edition is Nina Bressler Murphy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast series. I'm Nina Bressler Murphy. I'm the head of enterprise capability at Novartis. I'm your guest podcast host today, and I'd like to start by introducing my three guests. So let's start with my colleague, friend, and unboss, Simon Brown, the Chief Learning Officer at Novartis. This time last year, we could not have imagined the magnitude of energy, creativity, and curiosity that could have been unleashed in an organization such as Novartis. We were at the beginning of a journey to go big on learning, and what has come to life over the past year has people all over the world asking, what's happening at Novartis? Simon is here to tell us about the Novartis journey and give us some insights on how we've unleashed the power of our people by nurturing curiosity.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Nina. Great to be here on today's podcast. So Novartis is a focused medicines company. We're just over 100,000 people located all around the world. We focus on improving and extending patients' lives, and last year we touched nearly 800 million patients around the world. We do that through our strategy, which has 5 pillars. Number one pillar of that strategy is around unleashing the power of our people. And to unleash the power of our people, we've been on a 2-year journey to transform our culture. We have a culture aspiration around being inspired, curious, and unbossed. And that's the link to curiosity for today. So for the last 2 years, we've focused on how we inspire curiosity across our associates. And hopefully over the course of this podcast, I'm going to share some of the things that we've been up to.
Next, let's meet the two gentlemen who so kindly traded places with me to become guests. Garrick Jones and Paul Ashcroft are the founders of the Ludic Group and visionaries about what it means to thrive in the digital age.
Hi, Nina. This is Garrick. Simon, Paul, and myself are the 3 authors of The Curious Advantage. And we're absolutely delighted that you agreed to be our guest host because we wanted to present the book as the 3 authors and have somebody interview us the way that we normally interview everyone else in the podcasts. Why is curiosity important to thriving in the digital age? Well, I know Paul has his perspective, but from my perspective, it's all about other people and connecting with other people. And the way that we learn about new things and the way that we take ideas forward are through connecting with other networks where new ideas may thrive from that connection or existing ideas may be learned that are there before. But we need new people. We need to connect with them in order to go into new areas.
And hi, Nina. Great to be here with you. When we were researching this book on curiosity, I think what we found most fascinating is how people often start their lives feeling curious and being curious, but in some way along the way feel that they can't be anymore, or that curiosity is not part of their lives. And we were fascinated by this, and also how some of the organizations, and Novartis being a great example of one, is really using curiosity to their advantage and some of the results they've been seeing.
Why is it essential for today's world, Nina? I think the important thing is that we have this enormous resource, the internet, which has, the potential to have infinite access to all the knowledge that's in the world today. The question is, what do you do with it and what do you do when you're faced with it? And for us, the practice of curiosity, or being curious in an active, exploratory way that allows you to be safe and build confidence and connect with people, that practice of being curious is one of the key learning skills or power skills, we call it in the book, to enable us to make sense of this world and to move through it and to use it to our best advantage.
And Garrick, what actually makes you curious?
I'm curious about many, many things. I always have been since I was a child. I got into trouble occasionally. But I think that when I think about it, the thing that makes me most curious, other than other people, is history. I'm fascinated in what we can learn from history, the great millennium that have been in the past, the great epochs, the great empires. There are things about history and moments in history where everything has been turned on its head, and yet humans have done astonishing feats to achieve things. And it's that kind of stuff that makes me really curious. And I'm always on the hunt for new stories and historical stories.
Great. And Simon, what makes you curious?
So I've spent the last 20 years playing in the learning and development world. So my curiosity tends to focus around learning new ways of learning, new ideas. So there's a fantastic learning community out there, and trying to find the ideas across that community, whether that's through LinkedIn, whether that's through news, whether that's through podcasts, whether that's through interest groups with others in similar situations. Always looking for curious, I guess, around what's that new idea out there or that new thing that can help, and then apply that into the situation within Novartis of how we support our associates.
And Paul, I'd love to hear from you as well. What makes you curious?
What I'm most fascinated by at the moment is how fast our society has been changing. So Garrick talks about history and Simon's talking about sort of some of the innovations in technology, but the impact on how that is changing, not just the way we learn, but the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and what that has opened up, not just personally, but even for my children and the type of world that they're going to live in. So all the things that are changing so fast around us has been something that I've been fascinated by and exploring.
And in that context, Paul, do you see any barriers to curiosity that arise for people?
People inherently are curious. We believe that, and the research shows that. But often confidence and a feeling of safety tends to start to erode away our curiosity. So when we don't feel confident in a situation, certainly I feel that, or in some way if I don't feel safe or I'm in a very unfamiliar situation, then that's where it's difficult to still be curious.
So, in talking with you, I've heard you talk about an explorer mindset and also the pleasure centers in the brain that are activated. Could you talk to me a little bit about what happens when we're curious in our brains?
What's absolutely fascinating is that curiosity seems to stimulate the same response in our brain as when we are anticipating a reward. So the reward pathways in our brain that are connected to release of dopamine, which is the chemical in the brain that makes us happy and want more. Like if we're anticipating receiving a prize or some food, or in some way some pleasure. And curiosity does exactly the same thing to our brain. It makes us want more, and creates that need to explore and to discover. So in some way, we're wired to be curious.
I mean, always remember a story from when I was a kid. I must have been about 5 years old, and I was on a farm where everybody spoke a different language to the one I'd been brought up with, and I wanted to post a letter. And I went down on my bike to a post office where there was a counter that was too tall for me, and I found myself in a queue. And when I got to the front of the counter, I discovered I couldn't speak the language to make myself understood and post my letter. And I remember to this day that feeling of unease and being stressful. But the thing that it did for me, which I immediately wanted to learn the language. I remember returning to the farm a year later, having got some language and posting a letter. And it's a really crazy thing in my life, which I think it had huge impact. But it really talks to me about that, the pleasure that was associated with learning that language enough to be able to post that letter, and the feeling of euphoria I experienced when I did post that letter a year later is something I carry with me today.
It sounds like you started out as a little explorer and grew up into a big one. That's fantastic. Simon, I'm sure you see stories like this coming to life in business all the time. Can you think of anything from Novartis?
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is essential for us as a company that is constantly looking out for new medicines. So there are many ways that curiosity plays through and has an advantage for us as a business, the more we can foster and encourage it. So whether that's from the sort of start of a drug's life, where we're looking at thousands of molecules to identify which is the one molecule that will have an impact on a particular disease and be able to ultimately go through to cure it. And there's a huge element around curiosity to be able to discover that and take that through the process. And then even then at later stages in our process, we've seen recent curiosity in our manufacturing area where colleagues were curious around finding better ways of how we package up the medicines to be able to support people in how they take them and reminding them to be able to take those medicines. And then one that will be relevant for so many businesses out there is if we're looking forward to the future, then there's so much ambiguity out there around the impact of digital, the impact of automation, AI, so many unknowns that it's very difficult to know, which are going to be the critical skills, which are going to be the areas that are going to be most in demand. And therefore, if we're looking at curiosity across a workforce, that curiosity will be able to be applied to wherever the future goes. So encouraging a workforce that is curious is almost an insurance policy against where the future goes, because curious people will be able to build whatever skills are necessary to be able to work in that unknown future.
And I think that really takes us to kind of the thinking that curiosity is sometimes the human need to resolve uncertainty. Garrick or Paul, could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
The whole idea of uncertainty and resolving uncertainty goes back to some of the fight or flight ideas that we have as innate human beings built into us, that we're always seeking to be safe, and we're seeking to ensure that we are safe in situations. And from babies, we grow up trying to learn as much about the world as possible, the context around us, in order to ensure our safety. However, the danger as we get adults is we start to believe more and more that the world is a particular way and that we've got it figured out and we know how it works. And it only takes you to walk in the wilds if you come from the city, or to go to a farm if you've never been one, or to go to a place where they have animals and insects that you've not encountered before, to suddenly realize that you don't have the language or the skills to be able to navigate in that situation. And so then you get into a situation where your brain is firing off neurotransmitters to lay down new pathways and to learn further.
But actually, going back to something that Paul touched on at the beginning, all the time we hear that people are actually deterred from being curious. So, for example, last year when I was preparing the Curiosity Chapter campaign at Novartis, and I would tell people the name of the campaign, they would laugh at the title and say, oh, well, curiosity killed the cat. So are we telling ourselves and our children to actually avoid being curious because we believe that that might be dangerous? And is that a limiting belief that we need to overcome?
In Renaissance times and before, curiosity was actually deemed to be a dangerous thing. People weren't encouraged to explore, to be different, to try things new. We perhaps take it for granted these days that, at least in most societies, being creative and being curious is encouraged and to be supported. But it wasn't always that way, and perhaps that's where that comes from, this limiting belief that actually trying and testing is actually bad for you.
I think it's interesting because for many years we were trying to drive, if we look at, I guess, the Industrial Revolution and manufacturing, we're trying to drive to standardization and almost people as part of a machine of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And in today's world, it's as we were saying, it's so ambiguous now that you can't just repeat a process over and over and over again because things are moving so fast. So you need that curiosity to be able to deal with the unknown and to be able to navigate through what's coming. As part of our pursuit of curiosity within Novartis, we actually focused a whole quarter, 3 months last year, around curiosity with a whole series of events and activities that took place across the company. That culminated in our Learning Month, as we call it, which was 4 weeks focused around learning and really strengthening that curiosity. And that included over 250 events in different different locations around the world. It included over 130 global webinars, and we had over 34,000 people actually enroll on those. So there's massive uptake across the company. Had over 100,000 hours of learning. So the reason for doing that was really to invite people to be curious. And going back to your opening question there, and curiosity killed the cat, is to change the mindset around actually, no, we want people to be curious, because there's a huge business value in having a workforce that is curious.
And I guess I would ask, do you see curiosity as an inherent trait that we're born with, or something that can be learned?
I think we absolutely do believe that curiosity can be learned. It is in some way something we're born with, as we talked about. We're programmed to be curious, but it is a skill. And when we've spoken to people, we found that they said, well, I wonder about this. I'm interested in jazz. I'm interested in mountain bike riding, but then I didn't really ever get to go and do it. And we think that there is actually a way and a set of things that people can do that will enable them to be more successfully curious in their lives.
I'd love to talk about them in just a minute, but before we talk about that, could you come back and tell me about some other examples that you've seen where building a curious culture has really enabled an organization or a society to improve or transform the way they work in some way?
I'm very interested in social cultures who organize themselves around curiosity, two of which we talk about in the book. The first one is the Venetian Republic, which absolutely was committed to creating itself almost as a machine for exploration. They had organized themselves to build ships very quickly, powerful. They organized themselves to have money and investing to enable to fund these voyages. They had all the 16 sestieri in Venice sorted amongst the families and the hierarchies and the traders to quickly put all of these voyages together, and they protected the routes to the east, where they were able to trade and then bring back things and trade them in turn at great expense. The entire culture was built around schooling and education and learning around certain areas to make sure that knowledge was constantly improving. And the famous scuole in Venice were places of high learning where people would be part of almost secret societies, which would just take the learning about navigation, shipbuilding, map making, strategy, the weather, geography, warfare, etc., on and on, so that this entire society built on the water at the height of its power was just a curiosity machine in our respects.
And from a Novartis perspective, so we've been on a culture journey now for 2 years, and the number one priority for the company has been around unleashing the power of our people, which is moving towards this culture around inspired, curious, and unbossed. And as part of that, we're looking at ways for how do we measure curiosity so we can, without doubt, then make the linkages between culture, curiosity, and business performance. And that will take probably longer than a 2-year period to be able to make that link. However, what we are seeing is some of the metrics that go into curiosity, so something like the amount of time that people are spending on learning. Between 2018 and 2019, we saw over a 50% increase in the amount of learning hours on average that people are doing across the company. So that was actually after 3 years of declining hours, we then saw a massive spike. And that then correlates through, we can see how that curiosity and that increased time of people spending learning ties through to building key skills. So we can see an increase in key skills around things like data visualization, data management, which are absolutely critical. And then we also see that there was a fantastic performance from the company financially last year. So we can't make the absolute link between those, but we can see that a change in culture over 2 years has led to certain key metrics changing. And that coincides with a very strong performance from the company.
There's another part of this research that we need to keep an eye on, because it is early days yet, as Simon says. The key thing for me is about diversity. We know that there is a direct link between the diversity in a system and the value that is being generated, and that's being shown more and more by research that the more diverse and open the system, the more it's able to generate value because it's more able to be innovative. But we also know that there's a link between curiosity and diversity. And the diversity of a system allows it to be richer in terms of people's experience and so on. And the richer the environment, we believe, the more powerful the curious impacts will be.
So do you think it would be fair to say that curiosity is essentially a simple rule for complex times?
I love the idea of simple rules that have complex outcomes. And the vital few is something that's been talked about in the past. And we know about, beehives, for example, thrive and manage to self-regulate based on very few rules, like 7 rules or so. Things like feed each other, tell each other where the food is, keep it at a particular temperature, protect the queen. If you get too big, bifurcate and swarm, and so on. And these simple rules, I think, apply in society too. And I believe that simple rules such as curiosity is a vital power skill that we need for all of us to be able to deal with the information that we're faced with, and to be able to make powerful decisions and get great experience for moving forward into a future that we all want to enjoy.
Maybe if I can build on that as well, Garrick, because there's a talk I gave recently. We were talking around soft skills being the new power skills, and then curiosity actually being the sort of supercharger of those power skills. And that was based on 5 elements. So one was research around how curiosity actually helps you learn better. That came from the University of California, and that comes back to what Paul was saying earlier around the hippocampus and the reward part of the brain. And if you link learning with curiosity, it actually has a greater impact on your retention. Then there was research that was referenced in the Harvard Business Review around how curiosity powers up your decision making. It actually reduces conflict and it boosts communication skills. And then the final piece was INSEAD research, and that talks about how if you're curious, it actually drives greater innovation. So they've been able to make a link, I guess not surprisingly, that the more curious you are, actually the more innovative you are. So it builds on broader power skills to really sort of supercharge a whole range of skills.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
Well, guys, you've done it. You've really converted me. I am a believer that curiosity is critical. And I've heard you mention in passing the 7C's of curiosity.
So we have today our, I think, fairly well agreed 7C's, the Arctic, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, the Pacifics, the Indian, Southern Oceans. But when we delved into this, we found that actually all societies, all seafaring societies, had their own version of their 7C's. The Chinese had the seas and the rivers around their lands. The Mediterranean people had the seas around the Arabian, the Baltics, the Black Sea, and so on. In some ways, society seems to define itself around the seas, and the 7C's in particular, that is nearby them. And when we were thinking about curiosity, we discovered that there seemed to be 7C's, but in this case, 7 things beginning with the letter C.
Well, there were 5. Remember this, Simon? There were 5, and then we kind of crowbarred the last 2 in, but then we found they worked.
It did work, exactly.
So this is not a geography lesson, though, right?
No, it's a lot of serendipity, but it was a lot of fun to get to, I have to tell you, and it's proving it more and more useful as a learning tool.
Would you mind giving me a quick rundown of all of the 7C's of curiosity?
So our 7C's are context, community, curation, creativity, construction, criticality, and finally, confidence.
So the first C is context, right? So who wants to tell me a little bit about why context is so important for curiosity?
When you write about context, it's almost impossible to define, because context, and it means with text or with language, is the stuff that we are surrounded by in terms of ideas and concepts and meanings. And that's unutterably complicated. The thing about context is we have to inhabit context, and we also have to explore and learn about context. For example, if I want to be a jazz musician, there's a whole history of jazz, and there's a whole bunch of language around jazz, and there's a whole sort of hierarchy of a network of people who live and thrive in the jazz world. There's a whole theory of jazz musicianship that you have to know. It's a lot, but you have to enter through other people, and you kind of have to be let into this world, and then the contextual information starts to inhabit your neuroscientific brain, right? And then the same is true for new stuff. New context is things that haven't been laid down before. You might be an artist, you might be an innovator, and you're trying to find some solution which has never been found before, and you're looking all over the place in many different multidisciplinary areas, and you start to make connections, that are viable in your new situation, and you create essentially new context to do so. So the idea of curiosity and going into context and going into places you haven't been before is absolutely vital.
And Simon, how does that idea of finding context play out in the context of an organization like Novartis that's trying to reimagine medicine?
So maybe one example would be if we look at the patient experience. So when we are working through a new medicine, we need to understand the experience that an existing patient would go through. So what's the context of someone who is suffering from a particular disease? What is it that they're experiencing, and what are the things that we need to alleviate? And when it comes to designing that new solution, we really need to understand that context incredibly thoroughly. So how we design that medicine and how that medicine may be administered. There's lots of different ways that can happen, but without understanding the context, we may not choose the solution that is actually most effective. So it may be having that we need to design that as a pill, or it may be it's an injection, or it may be it's something else. Without understanding the context and the way that the patient is actually experiencing the disease, we may end up with applying our curiosity in the wrong direction and ending up with a solution that doesn't work.
That's so interesting. And I really also love the idea that communities then build on that context and use their diverse perspectives to drive solutions. And I know community is your next 7C. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Curiosity, we found, is powered by community. Being curious by yourself really just doesn't work, or certainly won't work for very long. To be able to fully explore something, we need to be with others. So, and these others in the community play different roles. So we may have teachers, friends, guides, people who are able to connect us to other parts of that area of knowledge that we need to explore. In essence, the idea of social learning and experimenting is in the heart of creating a culture of curiosity. And that's why we think community is such an important element of being successfully curious.
Do you guys have any great examples of how curiosity in a community brought something really extraordinary to life?
So there's an example within Novartis, which is going back a little while now, where we were curious around solving a problem in Africa around stocks of medicines. And we're finding issues whereby in rural Africa, it was very difficult to track what stocks of medicines were in different health centres or hospitals. And the curiosity of the team led them to come up with a solution that we called SMS for Life. And it was a very simple way of using SMS messages to be able to keep track of stockouts and be able to order new medicines. That was back in 2009 originally, and now fast forward, it's across many countries in Africa and even extended beyond, and over 10,000 health facilities are using the output of that curiosity of this SMS for Life to be able to keep track very, very simply around the stocks of medicines and make sure we don't run out of key, particularly anti-malarial medicines, to be able to support people there.
That is such a great example of focusing your curious energy and curating where it goes. And curation is actually the next C.
Yes, very nice. So great, Nina.
Beautifully
So,
done.
yeah, curation is really interesting. What we find is that if you have established a context, so I want to explore a topic, I'm interested in music. I start to build a community who are interested in a particular type of music. And then I find I want to focus in because, hey, music is a massive world. I'm interested in jazz. Actually, I'm interested in acid jazz in the 1980s. You start to then curate the content and the people and the tools you need around you in order to explore that particular area. Now, as you go on and explore further, you may come back and curate further and change that body of knowledge in that group that you're working with. But this continual process of curation is really important. And a side note to curation is technology is really helpful in this regard. So as we're seeing AI tools and other tools come on stream that are helping to filter and curate for us, think of our Netflix experience or online shopping experience, where the channels we use know our preferences and start, helpfully or not, to curate the experience that they give us.
So I was going to bring up some of the curation. We actually had some of our what we called influencers from across the company do as part of the curiosity chapter that I referred to earlier. So I guess where people are experts in their particular area to help others in their curiosity, we empowered a set of influencers to be able to curate playlists and bringing together a variety of different resources that they could share out then into the community for people who are curious. That may be specific learning resources, maybe articles, it may be even links into how to connect with the wider community to explore that curiosity.
Next in your list of 7C's is creativity. And I see a lot of curiosity also coming to life through people's creativity.
We link, and particularly even in our book, we link the idea of creativity and construction. And together, we like to think of this as our curiosity engine. So it's the things that we do that allow us to explore, to have new ideas, that spark of creativity, but also by being in the real world, by making and doing and figuring things out, it informs our practices, it stimulates our curiosity, and we get further into the topic in a constructive way. So we see that those two disciplines of being creative and through construction is the power horse, really, of our curiosity.
Would it be fair to say that creativity and construction are almost like a curiosity funnel?
Yeah, it's a nice way to think about it. You have to engage the two at the same time, and one informs the other. It also, funnel is an interesting word there because it implies in some way reduction and synthesis. And that is part of the process, we find, is that as you're being curious, you're honing in, you have a particular question you're trying to address. How does this work? Why would this be in this way? What's it like to live in a different country or in a different city? So by being in the world and exploring and finding out, you are funneling or focusing.
But at the same time as things are funneling, you also need to keep things open. And that's the wonderful thing about the relationship between creativity and construction. Making things and learning by doing is going to really help you figure out what you were trying to achieve and what you know and what you don't know. The creativity enables you to keep things open and find solutions to the problems you face as you move through the process. So they kind of have a symbiotic relationship conceptually.
That makes so much sense. I'm sure that at Novartis, you have some favorite examples of this, Simon. Would you mind speaking to them?
Yeah, so we have something called the Genesis Labs, and I guess that's playing a bit to both the creativity and the construction. So it's there to encourage innovative ideas in the research part of our business, and to support and help people in coming up with those ideas. There's a mechanism whereby once that idea is, if you like, endorsed, you can then get time, resources, and expertise to be able to then carry that through. So that's sort of playing to both the creativity and the construction piece to both create an environment that creates the creativity, and then once you have the creativity, to be able to build on that idea to be able to take that through into actually acting upon it. And be able to put it into practice through the construction part.
That's so interesting. Now, criticality is the next 7C, and I would love to hear your perspectives on that.
If you had to design the MBA of the future in the digital world, I think critical thinking and criticality will be at the heart of that. Reason being is that critical thinking is something that investigative journalists do, for example, or great scholars, whereas they're able to investigate something and learn about something, but remain emotionally distant from it. People who are investigative journalists can go into situations, war-torn situations. They can meet people, develop trust with people, new networks, and so on. They can keep the distinction between the subjective and the objective. What I mean by that is they can go into a situation, learn some stuff, and know whether it's impacting them emotionally or know whether it is truth or not truth as they investigate further. It's absolutely vital so that we are aware of all the elements of critical thinking, things like unconscious bias. We have to be very aware that we're not going down a rabbit warren of things that reinforce our belief of the world as it is, or that we're going down something that just gives us pleasure but doesn't actually teach us something new. Critical thinking is about being open to being uncomfortable and knowing that when we are uncomfortable in those situations, it's probably telling us something about what we are learning. The idea of critical thinking is at the heart of being able to learn new things that have real impact in our lives personally.
Sometimes it's hard to be critical as well. So, and I think there's some questions we can ask ourselves around this. And Lisa Bedell, who's the author of the book "Kill the Company," is great at this, where she tries to turn it around to say, what would actually kill off your company, and that then prompts a whole series of questions that make you be critical around your ideas and take your curiosity in a whole different dimension. That's an approach that we've applied with great effect.
And Simon, looking at the Novartis example, could you actually talk a little bit about how within our Unbossed Leadership Experience program, self-awareness and criticality is so key to becoming more conscious of your mind traps?
Yeah, so we have a program across our leaders to support what we call the Unbossed Leadership Experience. And as part of that, there's a big focus around self-awareness, so we can actually look critically at what it is that we all do as leaders day in, day out to be able to improve. And there's ways we all need to improve. That starts with a 360 feedback, and then one's team actually goes through that to identify what's the one big thing that you need to work on, and then over the course of a year, the team helps you to actually work on that. So it's really around self-awareness and bringing that criticality of looking back and finding things that you can be curious in your own behavior to improve.
And it's so great that, you really have the team there to support you. And I think it's actually a great segue to the last C, which is confidence.
So confidence is the last C, but in some ways it's the first C as well. Because when we've been looking at confidence and its relationship with curiosity, we found you can't disconnect the two things. Confidence grows with curiosity, and at the same time, being curious builds our confidence. What's clear is without confidence, we utterly cannot continue to do the brave things, to explore, to discover, to connect with new people that curiosity requires. So it's fascinating to think about the connection between the two. One of the things that we particularly explored is what gives us confidence then. And you think, well, just practicing and getting better at stuff makes us more confident. It makes us more certain that we're going to get on stage and give a good show. But actually, what we found is confidence doesn't come from just getting it right. It actually comes from getting it wrong. And so permitting yourself to have small failures, for example, if you were learning to climb up a rock wall, fall off every half a meter, every meter, safely,
not
comfortably,
too high up.
not too high, but enough so it knows what it's like. You know what it's like to fail, because it's the knowing what it's like to get it wrong is what really gives you the confidence to succeed and get it right. And that's what really underpins being curious throughout that sort of process and throughout the exploration.
Simon, would you mind giving us one more example from Novartis where you've really seen psychological safety and come to life to give our leaders and our associates confidence in their work?
I was thinking maybe using one of the technology examples, actually. So we use VR in some of our training pieces, and that allows people to be curious, to be able to try out and learn how to do things, but in a safe environment. And that's something we found is a hugely effective way of building that confidence, and plays to some of the things that Paul was just describing.
So it's been great walking through the 7C's with you. If our listeners were to do one thing today to help them live curiosity, where would you advise that they start?
So for me, it would be through curious questions, and one of the most powerful ones of I wonder if or what if, and that then leaves you open to all sorts of curious answers.
My one thing would be start doing it in the real world. Just wondering doesn't get us very far at all, but by actually trying and putting it into practice, that's where our curiosity comes to life.
And I think my one would be make new friends. Make new friends who do things that you are curious about, because you will learn a lot from them.
I love all of those, and I'm going to make sure that I am more conscious of putting them into practice on a regular basis. So thank you so much for allowing me to host this wonderful session of The Curious Advantage. It's been really insightful.
Thank you for being such a great host.
Thank you, Nina.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been an episode of the Curious Advantage podcast series. I invite you all to join in the conversation online and subscribe to this podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and edited by John McGinty and Jill Damatak-Futter.